This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellow Wall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 326 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm your host Stefan Butzko, and today we will talk about the anticlimactic end of the Bundesliga title race and Dortmund letting out their frustrations on last place Paderborn, hopefully. For that and more, join me, Matthias Zug. Hello Matthias, how are you doing?
Hello Stefan, I'm doing well today. How are you?
I am doing fine myself. Thank you very much. And also here, Lars Pollmann. Hello Lars, how are you?
Hello Stefan, I'm not gonna lie to you, I have a beer open next to me, but it's not a commentary on Dortmund's performance against Bayern. It's just been a fairly long day for me here in Germany.
So you enjoy your Feierabend beer, and in the meantime I will announce that this episode is sponsored by the Borussia Dortmund fan club London, and a big shout out goes to George Clark for his generosity. I want to thank all our patrons for their continued support. This is really helping out a lot. And if you want to also sponsor an episode, go to patreon.com/theyellowwall for more information. And I think that is pretty much all the housekeeping we have to do. And I guess we can delve right into the 1-0 loss against Bayern Munich, which was obviously very painful. And as I said in the intro, also very anticlimactic. Lars, you were bigging up the Yellowwallpod on the Stahlcast before the game, and you, I think, had Can Dahoud double pivot, or the Dahoud and Delaney double pivot on your wish list. Overall, were you happy with the lineup that Lucien Favre picked for this very vital game?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think there was any debate really beforehand, and the debate afterwards with the likes of Lothar Matthäus going in on Favre for not selecting Can and Jadon Sancho to start the game.
Sorry, I missed that here in the United States. Sorry. Too bad. Couldn't see or hear what Lothar Matthäus said. Anyway, continue.
Well, what I was going to say is that, this post-game debate kind of seemed like typical hindsight 2020 stuff to me, because Dortmund had won both of their games after lockdown ended in relatively convincing fashion with the same starting lineup. Both Can and Sancho, who are obviously the two previous subs who were closest to the starting 11 in terms of their general ability, they are quite clearly not fit. You can see that in the cameo appearances, especially of Sancho. I think Can looks closer to match fitness than the Englishman. So the only questions before the game were about the availability of Hummels, and on match day there were some rumblings about Piszczek potentially having some problems physically. But I mean, when those two were declared to be ready to go, I didn't have any qualms with what Favre did in terms of his team selection. And I think especially the first half performance also doesn't really lend itself to too much criticism, in my opinion. I think while they didn't, do enough to wrestle the title away from Bayern or whatever, I don't think this was necessarily the kind of performance after which you would have a go at the head coach for quote unquote obviously getting something wrong in terms of his selection. I don't think that was the case.
Yeah, I think we can talk about this a little bit later too, Matthias. How happy were you with the first half performance? Obviously, 2 minutes before the break, Joshua Kimmich scored that chip. But otherwise, I think it was a game played on a very high level, right? Especially in the first 40 minutes.
Absolutely. I don't like Joshua Kimmich for so many reasons, but also because I hate when someone makes me delete something I was going to tweet and and rewrite it because I was about to say just before the ball went, or I was prepping it and saying, as far as an analysis, that it was for a scoreless first half, very good 45 minutes of Bundesliga football from two teams pretty much on equal pegging. Dortmund, there was a true ebb and flow to the game. You had two goal line clearances. Granted, the Dortmund one was when Dortmund had to clear it, I think it was Piszczek. That was significantly more dramatic. The
back here clear just for the real.
The roller that Boateng had to clear, was a little more comfortable, but still it was there. There were opportunities, there were chances. It was very aggressive. I share Lucien Favre's total annoyance in the press conference post-match when he was read a question from a journalist who said, well, given that Bayern clearly were better physically and more aggressive and stronger than Dortmund, and Lucien Favre said, well, I guess you watched a different match than I did. And I agree with that. I don't think Dortmund were out-muscled and out-powered in this match in that sense. So it was a very good 45 minutes, unfortunately marred by Kimmich with a moment of brilliance. And that's really what that comes down to. It was a great goal by one of the most loathsome Bayern players on the pitch, but he's a really good footballer. So it was annoying to go into half with that after having played well. And, probably on the full 90, especially when you throw in and I'm sure you want to get to it eventually, the non-VAR penalty that was absolutely a penalty. I felt after the match that given how Dortmund played and how Bayern played, and I just feel like a draw may have been a more just result. That being said, I can't necessarily say that Bayern didn't deserve to win, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you go through the stats, it's all pretty even. I mean, you have 4 to 3 corners, you have 11 to 16 crosses, you have 790 to 753 touches. Dortmund had, I think, 2% more possession, 16 to 14 tackles, 13 to 4 interceptions, blah, 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 blah. I think shots, it was like 13 to 12. And I think Bayern had one shot more on target, or even the same amount in terms of expected goals. According to StatsBomb, both had 0.8. So if we want to look at statistics where both teams were really apart, it's maybe the non-shot expected goals where Bayern, I think, were up 2.39 versus 0.93. That's via the Twitter account Statified Football. And apparently these days that tells you something a bit more when the expected goal values don't really are all that conclusive. And I think there was one statistic that really jumped out to me a little bit, and was actually talking to Adam Dorowski about it, but he didn't really know what to make of it. And that was the presses, which is on fbref.com. You can find it a number of times applying pressure to opposing player who is receiving, carrying, or releasing the ball. The statistic, and Dortmund produced within 19 minutes 95 of these situations, and Bayern had 175. So I think that's a little bit indicative of the fact that Bayern managed to outpress Dortmund and were a little bit aggressive overall. I think especially those last 5 minutes before halftime, where Dortmund really were sort of stranded around their own box, and obviously, I think was it like 2 or 3 consecutive clearances, then that eventually led to the goal. You can see that there were moments where you were hoping for Dortmund to have a little bit more power, but obviously Bayern Munich are just such a good team, and I do feel that they're a bit fitter here and there, and maybe we can talk about the team behind the team in respective ways for Dortmund and Bayern, in the sense that Bayern players overall were fitter for this game, or maybe it was just poor luck for Dortmund that Thomas Delaney didn't have air for 90 minutes. Jadon Sancho didn't have air for 90 minutes. Emre Can, Axel Witsel either. So obviously that's a major deficit. That's very, really hard to make up in a game where it's really, wire to wire. But I don't know. That's a discussion or a conversation for someone else to have. That's an expertise or an insight I personally don't have. But I thought the statistic was interesting. Now, before we talk about the second half and all the VAR non-calls or whatever, Lars, I really have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed and sad that Julian Brandt had the game he had. Because there were a couple of instances, I think maybe 2 or 3, where he could have played the perfect through ball and just picked out the Bayern defender, or the ball went just completely wayward or whatever. I think there was one particular cross he just hit into the stands. So what did you make out of his performance, and was it the correct decision to take him off at the break?
Well, he was poor. I mean, I think you could argue he was the weakest link in Dortmund's play going forward. Would I have taken him off? Probably not, especially not for this Jadon Sancho at the moment, because I think it's quite visible that he's just nowhere anywhere close to, being fit enough to make a real impact even off the bench for 45 minutes against this Bayern side. So I think I would have probably preferred to make that substitution a bit later. Maybe Brandt would have gathered himself in the second half. I think with his performances ever since Dortmund have moved to the back three and he's gotten more freedoms creatively, I think it would have been... I think he has kind of earned the benefit of the doubt in a sense that it might have been more sensible for Favre to keep him on the pitch in the hopes of him getting it right in the second half, because he's been so influential in pretty much every attacking move Dortmund have made since lockdown has ended. So I think there was potentially an opportunity for him to get back into the groove of things. And as I said before, given how Sancho is operating at the moment, there was not really an advantage they gained either through that sub or through bringing on Can for Delaney, who I think had a very strong first half. So in a sense, Dortmund got weaker despite making 2 substitutions at halftime, which is not ideal. And to me, it also seemed like the energy levels actually dropped with 2 new players on the pitch. That is also very much not ideal. So especially with Sancho, but also with Haaland not really being in the game, it kind of felt at times Dortmund were playing with 1 or 2 players less on the pitch than Bayern were. And I think that contributed to Bayern being much more comfortable in the second half, especially early on, than they were at any point in the first half.
Yeah, I think I will very much agree on all the points you just made, and really also the only mild criticism I would level at Favre, because I can completely understand his train of thought. I think especially in games against Bayern, if a player is not really doing well, he likes to pull the trigger. I mean, he subbed off Jadon Sancho in the game against November rather early, and obviously Julian Brandt didn't have a good game, but I agree with you. I think I would have also just given him the benefit of the doubt, especially in the second half. The situations that Brandt had where he was in a position to play a poor pass or whatever, I don't remember too many of these situations reoccurring in the second half. So that sort of speaks for the, potential that Brandt had that Dortmund couldn't reproduce with other players on the field. I can definitely see that you want to take Delaney off, because I thought, especially in the last 5 or 6 minutes before the halftime, he was running a little bit on fumes, and the aggression he showed before and the tenacity, let's put it this way, wasn't quite on display. But I feel like if you have a 15-minute break, Thomas Delaney can get out there for another 10 or 15 or so minutes. So, it's a bit disappointing in that sense, but I can definitely understand why Lucien Favre made these moves. I can also understand why you want to bring Emre Can on at halftime, because he's also a very aggressive person, and you want him to settle into the game, and putting him on at halftime in that regard can help. So not ideal in the end, and didn't turn out as you want, but I don't want to be too harsh on Lucien Favre for those 2 halftime substitutions. How do you see it, Matthias?
Well, I mean, Twitter being Twitter, a lot of people said Dortmund lost because Favre's man management and substitutions, or that taking Brandt off cost Dortmund the game. I mean, I'm with you. I think that's more than a little harsh. That's extraordinarily harsh and narrow-minded from people who just have their mind made up about Lucien Favre. No matter what the man does, it's just bad. Given how Brandt played, and the pressing stat that you talked about was really interesting, because the goal kind of showed that in those last few minutes. Bayern pressing very effectively, which led to the situation coming about, and then Brandt just kind of looking at Kimmich. I think I can't remember if it was you, Stefan, or you, Lars, who said, the Kimmich force field, keeping Brandt away, and that's why I could see why Favre did that, and maybe thought, okay, Brandt's maybe getting a little bit tired, and so on. You maybe could have argued to bring on Götze instead of Sancho, but that's really hard to say at this point, given what Sancho's been producing over the last 2 seasons versus necessarily Götze specifically this season. So I can't fault him for the substitution. It didn't quite come off, and that can happen. That's not the be-all, end-all reason why at the end of the day Bayern edged this one. So I think I'm with you there, that it's a little bit harsh.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just a tragedy really for Dortmund that in this particular game, I don't know if Jadon Sancho gained the quarantine 15 or whatever it's called, or whether he was just a little out of sorts because of the calf injury. I'm not entirely sure, but overall, if you have this game and you are number 1 or the Bundesliga's leading contributor in goals and assists next to Robert Lewandowski, you obviously want to have him on the pitch and completely fit. I mean, Bayern Munich were without Niklas Süle and Thiago, which are obviously also major injuries. But yeah, not having a fully fit Sancho hurts you. Not having Marco Reus there hurts you. Not having a fully fit Emre Can and Axel Witsel hurts you. So that's just bad luck, I guess. And we can talk all about it, but overall, I think we also just have to highlight this, despite the adversity that Dortmund faced, that they had a really great defensive performance. I just mentioned Robert Lewandowski, and I think he hit that post after Mats Hummel's deflection, but otherwise, he had a pretty quiet game for a Robert Lewandowski against Dortmund game, because in the past, he really punished them. So I think since he joined Bayern, he scored 14 goals against Dortmund, something like that. So that was very painful. Lars, just to please Adam Dorowski, can you please talk about the great Lucas Piszczek performance that we saw, and maybe highlight other performances that you really liked on a defensive standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually start with Hummels, not Piszczek. I think Hummels had a fantastic game. Deflecting that shot of Lewandowski might have cost him, a goal conceded, which, wouldn't have really mattered because the game was basically done and dusted at that point, I would say. But he pretty much, I don't remember him losing a duel outside of his early booking, but with Hummels, I never get the sense that he's going to get himself sent off for something stupid. He has been sent off in his career before, but not very often for a player who's played so many games over the years. He was impeccable in the air, picked out a number of good passes. The only thing I didn't like was that he somehow ended up as their forward-most player in a few counter-attacking situations in the first half. I don't know exactly what happened there, if he was...
the vintage Felipe Santana move.
if yeah, but it would be great if it was the vintage Lucio move, because the former Leverkusen Bayern man was actually good at it. I don't know if he found himself in the wrong place at the right time, if you like, or if he was just so exuberant against his former club or whatever. But
sorry, you meant in the first half, probably, when he was like up front on counterattacks. Yeah, sorry, I was thinking at like the last 10 minutes when he was also just going up front. Sorry.
No, he was, for some strange reason, in 2 or 3 occasions the counter striker, if you like, and with his lack of pace. I think he also made a misplaced pass towards, I want to say, Dahoud, in a potential 3-on-2 kind of counter-attacking situation. So that was a bit bad. But I mean, Hummels as a centre half and kind of the libero, if you like, in his back three, he was really, really something else, and one of his best performances of the season, I would say. But also, not only to please Adam, but also to kind of say sorry because I forgot about him in a tweet review, if you like. Piszczek was also really, really good, and he's been great after lockdown has ended, for the most part anyway. You don't really see at the moment him playing at right-sided centre-back the age factor at all, which is a good sign because he obviously signed a contract extension just last week. So him being on this good kind of run of form, especially after a 9 weeks break where a lot of younger players seem to have issues with fitness, and you spoke about the quarantine 15 in terms of Sancho. I think Piszczek, I don't know how he does it, but he seems to have a lower fat percentage in his body still all the time. So I mean, he's basically, people talked about Erling Haaland as the cyborg before the game, but the actual robot in Dortmund's team is Lukas Piszczek. I mean, his physique for is he 34 or 35? I don't quite know. I mean, that's goals, life goals.
Yeah, definitely. Lars, you have like 4 years to get to the Piszczek level. Good luck.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Matthias, I'm afraid for you, that point has already long passed, but I'm sure at that age you were just as well in shape.
My goal is just to try to keep up with Tom Brady, since we're the same age. So, on so many levels to keep up with him. Well, no, I mean, I agree with what Lars said. And overall, the back three, the last 3 matches, Akanji overall has played pretty solidly as well. So, I mean, there's really not much nitpicking one can. I mean, it is nitpicking at this point, but there's no like, oh my God, the back three was so bad. Not at all. And that was really pleasing to see against a very good and fast Bayern side.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, defensively, this performance was really great. So all the more frustrating is that Dortmund allowed the goal they allowed, because in so many ways that was avoidable. At first, obviously, you have to clear that ball in so many better ways. I think the initial clearance was really, the one to blame. I don't know who played it, but that could have been easily dealt with, and then it just stuck up front. And Joshua Kimmich having that lob was a bit outrageous and obviously also very audacious. But I'm not entirely pleased with how Roman Bürki did there. Obviously, it's not an easy ball to save, far from it. But I also think in such a big match on that stage, as the goalkeeper of Germany's or the Bundesliga's second best team, you need to be there to save that one. So I've been a little bit disappointed with that particular failed save attempt. I hold Roman Bürki to a higher standard. Also, I think he has saved balls like that one before. I mean, he clearly got the hand to it and just got it wrong. So Matthias, is this a moment to start a Roman Bürki discussion and saying
no.
that's
no
okay?
No, can I end the discussion now? No. I watched that goal a few times, and had he been a half a step deeper, he would have saved it. It would have palmed it over the bar or whatever, or so be it. His positioning overall wasn't wrong, because a goalkeeper needs to anticipate the majority of shots and not the audacious 1 in 100 attempt shots. And so the other thing he has to anticipate is that 10 people ahead of him, that somebody would step in and put a little pressure on someone taking a shot from there, while there were also defenders in the way. I think, I know you're not blaming Roman Bürki for that goal. The blame goes somewhere completely differently, also from your arguments. For those people that did blame Roman Bürki for the goal, including Steffen Freund, I think honestly that's a little lazy, because you're not looking and there's that narrative that people still have in their brains that Roman Bürki isn't good. I mean, on One Football today they said that, basically Schubert from Schalke is a better keeper than Bürki, and that's just a joke. I mean, you can't honestly say that Bürki makes way more mistakes than Schubert. I mean, then you're getting to the point where I can't take your opinion seriously anymore. If he would have taken a step back a little bit earlier, he would have saved it. He didn't, because he wasn't anticipating that shot, and nobody did. Nobody could anticipate that shot. We should just take less away from the shot, and more in the area of he should have just been pressed. I mean, Brandt was there. Brandt was right there and did nothing. And I have a bigger issue with that than necessarily a half a step forward or backward from Bürki in that situation.
Well, I don't know if Julian Brandt realistically could have gotten there. Maybe he could have, since I expect him to read the game quite well. But I mean, the clearance was also quite bad. I think that was from Delaney, just sort of poked it forward. But Lars, I do want to hear your take on that Roman Bürki save, and I think you wrote something for Fußball.news on that subject, and I think it ended up a little bit inconclusive. Am I right there?
Well, I mean, I want to almost answer the question you posed to Matthias about do we need to have a Bürki discussion? I think there's an argument to be made that the only reason not to have the discussion now is because it's already started. And that's not down to this singular instance, where I would say it's somewhere between him being unlucky and a slight mistake. I definitely wouldn't say that's a ball he has to save 100 out of 100 times, but to me, it's indicative of the kind of season Roman Bürki is having in the Bundesliga, and there's a real discussion to be had there if you look at the numbers, which is obviously always a bit difficult with goalkeepers, because there's, as statisticians will tell you, there aren't a lot of great numbers that are indicative of goalkeeper performance, but still, I mean, he's hovering around slightly above now 50% of shots saved, which is not a very good stat for a goalkeeper at a team like Dortmund. He's conceding far more goals than he should in terms of expected goals. He was, when I looked at it more in depth in February, he was actually the worst goalkeeper in the Bundesliga in that regard. There have been a number of instances this season where something like this Kimmich goal happened. Something not necessarily a huge mistake, but also not something where you would say that, one of the best goalkeepers in the Bundesliga, which is definitely what Dortmund should strive to have in their goal, would make the kind of slight mistake, or whatever you want to call it, that Bürki made in that instance. So he hasn't had really any wow performance in the Bundesliga this season. I can't remember one really. He had
maybe
his best
one
game
against
of the season.
Gladbach, something like that.
Maybe, I don't quite remember. I mean, his best performance of the season, I would say, was at home to Slavia Prague in the Champions League. He definitely got Dortmund into the knockout stages there, if you like, or at least played the most important part in the Dortmund half of that. The other kudos go to Barcelona's second team and Inter's ineptitude. But yeah, I mean, he's just not having the kind of season the starting goalkeeper at Borussia Dortmund should have, in my opinion. And he's been the undisputed number one for 5 years now, or coming up to 5 years at the end of the season. He's 29 years old, and we are still talking about him in terms of lack of, stability in performances and him having ups and downs and whatnot. So I think, for as much as I like him, and I think regular listeners know that I've always defended him, and probably in end of the season award kind of shows picked him once or twice to be my player of the season. I think there's an argument to be made that Roman Bürki hasn't proved, especially this season, that he's definitely good enough for the kind of aspirations Dortmund need to have. And if someone's not definitely good enough, he's probably not good enough. So I think there's an argument to be made that Dortmund should look to upgrade in that position, or at least have a more healthy competition than they've had in recent years with, back in the day, Roman Weidenfeller on his last legs, with Marvin Hitz, who's a career number 2 at this level. I think that's something they definitely should look at. And now, obviously, there are rumors coming out of England, which have been confirmed somewhat by some German outlets, that there's interest from Chelsea to buy him. I don't exactly understand why Chelsea would look to add a 29-year-old from Borussia Dortmund necessarily, but I think that's something that Dortmund should definitely consider, because I think there's an upgrade to be made in goal on a player that I still pretty much like and respect as a person, and I think he's a good character to have, but I think performance-wise he's not been up to the standards that I would set for the starting goalkeeper of Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah, I don't know who said it, but it stuck to me that someone said great teams are always built on the back of great goalkeepers. I don't know if that can be confirmed 100%, but I still feel like Roman Bürki is a very good goalkeeper, but he's not a great goalkeeper. That being said, I don't know if Dortmund can easily draw a better alternative out of the hat, but I agree more with your sentiment, Lars, that I think there needs to be a discussion, if you want his 5-year review. It's been very topsy-turvy, and yesterday I was scrolling through my media. I was looking for another image or something, but I stumbled across the GIF of last season where I put the Meisterschale on the ball that slips through his hands when he was making this mistake against Bremen. Just a reminder that last season Roman Bürki in crunch time also had his problems, like so many other Dortmund players. But yeah, I don't know. Final thoughts. I guess you, Matthias, if you would look for an alternative, who would it be? Jan Sommer, maybe?
No, I wouldn't pick Jan Sommer necessarily, given what it would cost to get him. I think possibly look somewhere else. I don't know. I mean, even though he's been doing really well for Freiburg, I don't know if Schwolo is much of an upgrade over Bürki. I personally think that there are other areas of the squad that need improvement over Roman Bürki. And we also can't forget Bayern won titles with Hans-Jörg Butt in goal. So, and he was an average Bundesliga keeper at that time. So you can have a discussion. I don't think it should be off the basis of this match. I'm not it. It's not my thing. I think there are significantly other areas we need to look at for the squad to improve, before looking at Roman Bürki in that situation. So I'm not really bothered with it.
Well, I will make one final point, and this that Roman Weidenfeller had his renaissance, or whatever you want to call it, or his elevation to, I think, even world class at a very late stage in his career. And Roman Bürki is 29 years old, but for a goalkeeper, that means there are still a couple of seasons left where you can achieve another level. So, you can obviously always be hopeful that Roman Bürki will do just that. But before we waste or spend too much time on that particular subject, I think it is time to talk about Bayern's goalkeeper. which in this instance, in the 58th minute, was Jerome Boateng. I think that was a 100% clear penalty. If there's anyone in disagreement with me, please speak now. 99?
I'm already unpopular with Roman Bürki's stance, so I might as well go for it. I'm still not in the camp of that's Stonewall 1000%. You have to give it a penalty, or rather, Stonewall 1000%. That's a clear mistake by the referee. I think there's an argument to be made that it's in the what is called the Toleranzbereich in German, so the gray area, if you like. But I will say that for obvious reasons, the implementation of VAR standards in Germany hasn't been in recent, or basically since the midway through the first season, it has to be a clear-cut mistake anymore. It's been, hey, take a look at this, you might switch your decision up. So while I'm not sure that it was necessarily, or it was in the threshold of clear-cut mistake 100% by the referee, it was definitely in the area where I would say he has to take a look at it. And I don't understand why that didn't take place. I'm definitely not buying the argument that Dortmund played out the corner too quickly, because it was the opposite side, if you like, from the lead TV camera in Germany, which is where that linesman is standing, and that linesman is standing over the ball until the situation is cleared. So even if he didn't stand over the ball, he would certainly make a hand signal to, I suppose, Torgan Hazard was probably taking that corner, not to take the corner before he got clearance from the main referee. So I'm fairly convinced that there was the kind of discussion between the Cologne seller and referee, who was it, Stieler, about the situation. And for whatever reason, they said, play on. And I don't want to feed into the argument of Bayern having that innate bonus with referees and whatever. I don't think that's the case. I think that's been actually disproven by a scientific approach. But there's still that nagging feeling almost that would Bayern have gotten that penalty? Possibly. And there's no real explanation for that.
Well, I first of all have to apologize to our listeners for, as a podcast host, making the mistake to award Lars the chance to make a nuanced opinion and talk about scientific approaches here, because it's obviously not what the content anyone craves here right now. So, Matthias, go ahead and tell me how you feel about that non-call.
Well, so I'm the non-scientific person.
I'm assigning roles here, so
I appreciate that. Thanks for stereotyping.
I'm not. I just know what the listeners want to hear, and if you don't do it, I will.
Okay, so the 100%. I believe it was a penalty. The arm went to the ball that was heading, looked pretty much like towards the bottom corner. That's an unnatural movement, extending the arm, stopping a goal corner. I mean, you want to name it what it is. To me, it's a penalty. But beyond that, even if it's in that area of interpretation, like Lars said, the fact that it wasn't even reviewed is laughable. It's ridiculous, and that would have changed the course of the match, obviously. If everything else plays out the same way, it's a 1-1 draw, it's a point each, and things are a lot tighter, and who knows how teams react after that. But it changed the course of the game. The fact that he didn't even look, that nobody even said, look at it. And I'm with Lars in the sense of, even though I bemoan it, I'm not a big fan of conspiracy theories, even though in Serie A it's 100% correct that Juve get the big calls. And But in the Bundesliga, I'm not sure about that. But a situation like this feeds that feeling of, well, it's bad enough that Bayern are that good with the 11 players to beat. We don't need the ref and the VAR officials to play against us as well. So it kind of feeds that feeling. And it was a situation that I just don't understand how that's not even looked at in more detail. It was just waved off. And it was, when you look at the way the shot kind of careened away from the goal, I went, okay, that looked weird and very unnatural. And then they showed the replay right away. And also the commentators were like, hey, wait a minute. That could be something. And that nothing happened is, it's embarrassing to say the least.
Well, to me, it looked like the ball was going in, and to me, it also looked like the elbow was clearly blocking exactly that little window where the ball would have went into the net. So I'm pretty sure, but obviously can't 100% confirm it, that the ball would have gone into the net. And I don't think with that much power from that position that Neuer would have saved that one. So yeah, it's utterly frustrating. And I can 100% understand the grievances that especially Dortmund fans have. I mean, just talk about the Dante kick into Marco Reus' stomach in the Champions League final, which did not result into a second yellow card. And then the clear goal Dortmund scored in the cup final, I think, by Hummels, which was over the line but wasn't given. And all the millions of antics of Franck Ribéry where he never was sent off. And then obviously, I think in the Super Cup, we had Joshua Kimmich stomping on Jadon Sancho's foot, which should have been a red card and resulted in a ban for the first couple of Bundesliga matches or something like that, which also, wasn't reviewed, or I don't even remember what exactly happened, but I felt like, the punishment on Bayern could have been a little bit harsh in that instance. So there are a variety of instances where Dortmund really feel disadvantaged and Bayern getting big calls. I mean, I'm sure Bayern fans will more vividly remember other situations where Dortmund were probably favored, but that's as a Dortmund fan, the emotional memories you have are obviously the ones where you were wronged by the referees against Bayern, and obviously that feeling that they have more than enough advantages, so they don't need the 12 men or the other officials helping them out a little bit more. So, I mean, ultimately, it's even worse that Erling Haaland had to be subbed off because he clattered into Tobias Schieler and injured his knee and is now out against Paderborn. So, there's that. I don't know. Maybe Bayern should have had the penalty when Akanji pushed Lewandowski to the ground, but I think that's a situation where it's much more, of a 50-50 situation, and I don't really need VAR to review that one. I think the referee saw it in that instance quite clearly, and Lewandowski likes to go to the ground quite easily, and that little push-off, I don't know. I'm not having it, but so back to the other parts of the game. Obviously, Haaland had to go off in the 72nd minute, and in the 80th, Mario Götze came on for Lukas Piszczek, and I think in the final 5 minutes, Witzel came on for Mahmoud Dahoud. However, I personally don't remember too many big chances that Dortmund had in the final half hour where they really had to push for it. Lars, how do you assess the maybe last 30 minutes of the game?
I'm unsure whether that was down to Dortmund's lack of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, courage or, guile towards the goal, but or if it wasn't down to just Bayern having a very strong performance, a commanding kind of performance. I think in general, this game was always going to be pretty difficult for Dortmund, not because it's Bayern and they have the best players in the Bundesliga by and large and all those things, but from like a tactical perspective, the matchup always was going to favor Bayern, for they could play to their usual strength in this game, whereas Dortmund had to have an outstanding performance in some areas, because Bayern are incredibly good since Hansi Flick has taken over, and especially in 2020 in pressing and counter pressing, and so that really lended itself to the game being in Bayern's favor from the get-go, if you like. And especially in the second half, they were so much in control without doing much going forward. I mean, they wasted a couple of breakaway opportunities when Dortmund didn't track back with enough men, which was down to the aforementioned physical problems, I would assume. But Bayern was still very much in control just by playing their normal stuff, if you like, even though they obviously let Dortmund have much more of the possession in the second half. So I don't know how to view the second half, especially with the substitutions, as we talked about earlier. The energy levels at Dortmund or in Dortmund's team kind of seemed to drop to me, which wasn't good. But ultimately, I think the story of the game really was just how good Bayern are at the moment, and not so much what Dortmund did or didn't do.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to get shellacked by this Bayern team, and especially against Dortmund, I think Bayern managed to really shift into the highest gear. Maybe you can argue that in a different sense and with different settings, Bayern might have even played better if they had to push more for a goal or whatever. I think in this particular game, they actually were more content with the draw and happy to sit on this 1-0 lead and to just maturely play it down to an extent. So I think had Bayern pushed harder, maybe they could have scored a couple more goals in this game. But overall, I will say that given how good Bayern are right now and how well they played on Tuesday evening, that Dortmund held very well against it. And yeah, you will need a little luck, but to maybe take the 20,000 foot view here a little bit, Matthias, I felt like maybe 5-6 years ago, 100% under Jürgen Klopp, I think Borussia Dortmund sort of were designed to play against Bayern Munich in their overall setup and philosophy. Right now under Lucien Favre, I don't, I wouldn't be as convinced to say that this Dortmund team is sort of the antithesis or whatever, or sort of the kryptonite against this Bayern side. So what do you make of this take that I just put out into the world?
Well, I don't necessarily think you're wrong. I think obviously it was a different time.
It
back
was
then.
also a different Bayern, to be honest.
It was different Bayern. It was if we think. It was Louis van Gaal, and then, of course, Heinkes coming back, and it was kind of in a weird rebuild stage at that point. So you had such a young, aggressive, hungry, and fearless Dortmund side. They were too young to know that they should be worried, and that swagger from Jürgen Klopp, it was just perfect. It was the perfect constellation of a young coach that had a lot to prove, that wanted to get his philosophy across and his own energy and fearlessness. And you had young players that embodied that. I mean, you just think about someone who, from a quality of a player, was limited, Kevin Grosskreutz, but who fit that perfectly and who did not give a shit as far as who he was playing against. He didn't care. He was just out there playing. And that has gotten lost over the years at Dortmund. But that being said, you do have players that kind of remind me of that hunger, and specifically two players that unfortunately were not really fit for this match. Holland, who picked up the knock, and then of course Emre Can, who's still coming back to fitness, who have that kind of a FU mentality. We're out here to win it and get it done. And Guerrero said the same thing. We want to beat them. We can't beat them. We're a different side. And Dortmund did play differently with a completely different attitude. But occasionally you just still shrink in moments. And it's just a shame that you didn't have fully fit Dortmund and fully fit Bayern. I mean, Bayern were probably closer to a fully fit side than Dortmund when you think about some of the players that Dortmund was missing. And so it's kind of like, I wish all those guys would have been healthy and then see where we are. That being said, it was still really, really close. Playing Delaney and Dahoud instead of Can and Witzel, knowing that Sancho's out, knowing that Reus is out, and Haaland took a knock, Zagadou being out, but still, even with all of those caveats, it still got really, really close. So it's not terribly far away, and so maybe you need to look at a little bit more depth in some positions, and maybe, even though I don't think this match warrants the Favre discussion, maybe it's along the Bürki lines of you have to look at the 2 seasons in a whole to maybe have that discussion about Lucien Favre. But maybe it is also, the feeding off of the man in charge, which was a big part of the club's success, and since then has been impossible to replicate. Maybe that's part of it. I mean, I don't know if some of the names that are bandied about would get that kind of reaction, aside from having witnessed it very closely myself. Maurizio Pochettino, which I think is a complete pipe dream for Dortmund, as far as feeding off the energy of a manager. And Lucien Favre, that's not who he is, and that's perfectly fine. And that, I think, can all kind of play in that, may be grasping at straws here.
Yeah, so, Lars, before we may or may not talk about the coaches discussion, I may want to make 1 or 2 points on it, but I think you've been asked on Twitter how Dortmund would sort of break that Bayern monopoly. What was your response there?
Well, I said they need Bayern to enter the European Super League, which I'm pretty sure we are going to see in our lifetimes. Maybe not Matthias, if I may make that joke, but yeah. I mean, I'm not. Obviously, that was a bit in jest on Twitter, because I mean, clearly Bayern are not going to win the next, however many 25 German championships. That's just not how professional sports work. Every dynasty has like a slip up here, and I'm sure they are going to have that year just as well as Juventus will have, and just as well as there's going to be another Leicester somewhere, where a club that isn't among the absolute elite of that certain league is going to have that one year where everything goes their way. Certainly that's going to be the case at some point in Germany as well, and you would think that Dortmund are going to be the team next to Leipzig, perhaps, that are the most logical choice, if not Bayern. But overall, the biggest difference between Bayern and Dortmund isn't, individual quality of the players right now or whatever, or, the mentality or whatever. You could argue anyway, even though I don't think it's the be-all, end-all explainer for the differences between the clubs. But there's no denying that Bayern have a massive financial advantage over everyone in the league, including Dortmund, who are the closest to them. I mean, you could argue then if it was only finances and the financial might of Bayern, then you could argue, why aren't Dortmund much better than Leipzig or Leverkusen or Gladbach? Because the difference between those clubs and Dortmund, especially Gladbach and Leverkusen, is about as large as the difference between Bayern and Dortmund in terms of what they can pay players or whatever. But still, I mean, there's no denying that having 250 million more revenue per season and a much larger wage bill probably is conducive to more success. So, I mean, until there are mechanisms in place to combat that, it's going to always be down to Bayern basically mucking it up over enough time in a season. I mean, they've made 2 relatively bad coaching appointments in recent years, with Carlo Ancelotti, who's not a great fit for Bayern, and Niko Kovac, who's just not, a top tier coach, I would say. But it didn't matter, because they they fired those two early enough to recover under Jupp Heynckes and Hansi Flick to win the championship again. So you would need a situation in which either Bayern don't fire their coach or the guy taking over doesn't have the same kind of turnaround. And as I said, I'm sure that's going to happen eventually, and Dortmund need to be ready to pounce, which they obviously are. I mean, last season they were quite close. This season they weren't too far away, even though it's 7 points now. But as I said, it's going to the championship will run pretty much forever until there are mechanisms in place to get the teams closer. Will run through Bayern and will depend on Bayern making enough mistakes for someone else to pinch it from them. And we are going to see that, I guarantee it, but nobody knows when.
Yeah, it might actually be next season or something, It's not completely out of the realm of possibility that Dortmund can keep Jadon Sancho and both Erling Haaland together for the next season. I'm still not entirely sure if there's going to be a big fee for Sancho out there, considering the Rona and also whether Dortmund are actually willing to absolutely sell him. I feel like there was a gentleman's agreement at the start of this season that he may leave then, but who knows how everything has changed. But also we mustn't forget that Bayern for many, many years now have, a very good core of players that just keeps playing together. And, long-time listeners will know that one of my favorite words in soccer is automatism. And I think that also helps that Bayern really have managed to keep their team together. And Dortmund obviously have brought in a lot of new transfers at the beginning of the season. And I heard a lot of talk about the 100 million that Dortmund spent. But guess what? I think Lars just pointed out that even if Dortmund invests 100 million into players, they're still short of whatever Bayern are spending. So I think that needs to be kept in mind. And it was kind of weird that there was a coaching discussion about Lucien Favre straight after the game. I think it was a bit of unfortunate how Lucien Favre, I think, talked to Sky. I haven't seen the interview myself. So, and I think the Bild Zeitung and others have floated around the name Niko Kovac. I don't think now is actually the time to replace Lucien Favre. I can maybe understand where the sentiment is coming from, but I think Favre needed about a third of this season maybe to figure out how to play with this team successfully. But I also do think that he now actually has found a balance, and Dortmund now have a very balanced squad. Obviously, there are still adjustments to be made if here and there, but overall, I think Dortmund have what it takes to be a title-winning side, barring that Bayern obviously do have the same opportunities. But that being said, I think Dortmund are in general on a good track right now. So a very narrow 1-0 loss against Bayern and the 7-point deficit, which very easily could have been, much fewer points. I'm not willing to kick loose a coaching discussion right now, but it's out there in the air. So, Matthias, if you have any thoughts and opinions on that particular discussion, be my guest. But I personally don't think you need to disrupt the coaching position right now in Dortmund. I actually would appreciate the consistency at least for another season, and then look back and see where you are.
No, I have to agree.
All right, so I guess then we can move on to Paderborn, unless you, Lars, have any final thoughts on the Bayern match.
Well, you didn't actually ask me about Favre, and I do have somewhat a slightly different opinion, or just a different viewpoint, I would guess. He's under contract until 2021, so next season, which makes him, quote-unquote, a lame duck. And Dortmund are usually very weary of going into a season with a lame duck head coach. Last time that happened was they didn't go into the season with him, but Peter Stöger was the last head coach who was coaching towards the expiration date of his contract. And even in that situation, when he was clearly the caretaker interim kind of head coach. Even with that situation, there were a lot of questions asked to Hans-Joachim Watzke, even Michael Zorc at times. When are you going to talk to Stöger? When are you going to make this decision? Blah, blah, blah. And they don't like that. They don't want to have that situation. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind when it comes to Favre. My reading on the situation, hearing a few things reading between the lines here and there, is they would probably like to keep him for next season, also because of, the uncertainty in Corona times. But since he's going to be a lame duck and he probably doesn't deserve, the kind of confidence that a contract extension right now would provide him. I mean, they extended his contract after the relatively disappointing second half of last season, I would say, just because he was going to be otherwise a lame duck this season already. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a coaching change in the summer. And then you also always have to remember with Favre that he's a bit jumpy as a personality. He threatened leaving his post at Hertha and Gladbach. He actually followed up on that threat at Gladbach after, losing the first 4 or 5 games, I think, in 2015, the first of which was Thomas Tuchel's first game in charge at Dortmund, if we remember back to then. There's precedent for him to leave his club. Obviously, people are probably making too much out of that and think he's definitely leaving after what he said to Sky, as you mentioned earlier, which was kind of cryptic, but probably not meant in the way that it was interpreted by Lothar Matthäus and others afterwards. But still, that's just the picture we have of Favre and the empirical evidence also of Favre. So that's also something to consider. So all told, I would not be shocked at all if there was a coaching change, but I think there are circumstances that make that fairly difficult. You have to remember that if you wanted to sign someone in a club right now, I don't see more than maybe 1 or 2 candidates in Germany, and those are more fallback options than anything else. I think if you look at Hütter of Frankfurt and Kofeld of Bremen, you would think right now they are not, electable, if you like. I mean, in terms of the football their teams play, that might generally be considered a fit with Dortmund, but obviously they are now in relegation battles, and Kofeld even looks pretty much nailed on after Düsseldorf beat Schalke on Wednesday to actually face the drop into second Bundesliga. So I don't think you can sell, if you like, either of those 2 candidates. So you are probably looking at either a head coach who's currently out of a job, someone like Pochettino, not going to happen, or Kovac, dear God, I hope this doesn't happen. So you are looking at someone in a league that is probably going to play into July. Someone from the Premier League. My favorite solution would probably be Ralf Hasenhüttl of Southampton. He's going to coach into July. Daniel Farke, who's been mentioned, is going to coach into July at Norwich and probably going to be relegated with them. So there's another question of electability there. So there's a lot of factors to consider here. I mean, do you wait with summer prep like 3 or 4 weeks until you get Hasenhüttl out of Southampton after their season is over in England? That's hard to envision. So I think it's really a difficult situation because of coronavirus for every team that wants to make a coaching change. And I'm not sure Dortmund want to, but I still wouldn't be surprised if there was one, if that makes sense. So this was a long-winded way of saying I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised by anything.
No, I completely agree with that analysis, and sorry for just sort of barging over you there. I think there was still very valuable input. So I guess without any further ado, Lars, and now as you have nicely asked in pre-pod, please tell me everything you know about SC Paderborn 07.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the exact quote I said, but to paraphrase, I said, Stefan, don't you dare ask me anything about stupid Paderborn because I don't know shit. I can tell you that Jürgen Jasula, their midfielder who's wearing a Petr Cech memorial helmet after, I think, also suffering a skull fracture at some point. He's suspended for the third time this season by amounting 5 bookings. So he's on 15 yellow cards, which is quite impressive. He's one of the Bundesliga all-time record held by Thomas Scheito of Schalke, if I'm not mistaken. So that's something to aim for, I guess, as Paderborn, because quite clearly they are going to be relegated at the end of the season. I mean, they are... I already forgot, but I looked it up before we hit record. I was looking at the table, but I already forgot because that's how unimportant Paderborn are in my life. So let's just remember back to the 3-3 draw, which I didn't even see live back in November, which, funnily enough, was when everybody thought this was going to be perhaps it for Lucien Favre, and then he turned things around. So maybe that's the same thing going to happen now.
Yeah, unfortunately, the guy isn't called Jürgen, but Klaus Jasula, but I don't really care either.
His brother, I think his brother is Jürgen Jasula.
I didn't even know he had a brother, so...
yeah, formerly of Kaiserslautern.
See, there you already know much more of me, of the Niederung of the German football. Anyway, so yeah, they are obviously in last place, as you just mentioned. They have...
No, Klaus Jasula was at Kaiserslautern. Jürgen was at Kräuter Fürth, for example.
There you go. So yeah, they're in the bottom with 19 points. So Bremen right now have 22. Düsseldorf in 16th place have 27. So yeah, being 8 points off, the relegation playoff spot. I think that's more or less the nail in the coffin, especially if you play against Dortmund. I think they have drawn their last 3 league matches, if I'm not entirely mistaken. So, there might still be a tiny little bit of hope in this Paderborn side, but I don't know if I've said it earlier, but I feel like the one time the lack of crowd in the Bayern game for Dortmund was really a negative, was that penalty call, because I feel like if 20,000-30,000 people at the same time scream for a handball, whether it hit the ball or not, maybe there's more inclination for referees to look it up. But I feel like Paderborn, without the crowd, are pretty much dead in the water against this Dortmund side. I don't think that Dortmund will be caught out on the counter-attack a second time this season. So I do believe this is going to be a bit of an easier win. Matthias, I don't know how much Paderborn input you have, but if not, you can always talk about who will replace Erling Haaland up front.
Well, as a Münsteraner, I know a lot about the Niederung of German football, and still have actually fond youth tournament memories in the 90s in Paderborn, against Paderborn and Gütersloh and Bielefeld and all that Ostwestfalen garbage. But that's kind of where it ends. I kind of agree with you. I think Paderborn, they're done and dusted. As far as who will be up front instead of Erling Braut Haaland, I think it wouldn't be entirely shocking to see Mario Götze, or depending on how fitness is, if Sancho is fit to play, then it would probably be Hazard up top with Sancho and Brandt right behind him, or a Gio Reyna and Brandt behind Hazard. We've seen Hazard play up top before the season with mixed results at times. I think against Paderborn, it may actually not be a bad idea to kind of draw them out a little bit, even though they're not necessarily known for the greatest defensive discipline and lack of aggression. Obviously, they're going to play aggressive. They're going to try to hit Dortmund on the counter. I don't think that's going to happen as blatantly as it did in the first time these two teams played against each other. Also, because I think Dortmund is playing at a completely different level now than they were at that point. So I'm cautiously thinking Hazard will be the striker kind of false 9-ish ahead of 2 false 10s. So if we just keep ahead of 2 false 6s, I don't know. A lot of false positions, but I think that's the most likely scenario.
Yeah, so Lars, obviously in sports sometimes it is so if you announce a goal like Dortmund did that they want to win the championship and then you get the impression, it's still mathematically possible, but that it's not going to happen, that you deflate a little bit. And against last place Paderborn, who are fighting for dear life, obviously this can bode an upset, even though I said that I don't see it. But given that Leipzig are right now just 2 points off Dortmund and Gladbach are 4 points away, and that means also Leverkusen are 4 points away in 5th place. So the season is a lot of things for Dortmund, but it's certainly not over because they do not want to finish in 5th place. That I think would be the absolute worst case scenario. So how do you think Dortmund will approach this game? Do you think that the chance of deflation that I just mentioned is actually a big one with this side right now? And are there any other lineup shots that you want to give out?
Well, starting with the last bit, I would put, I don't bet on sports, but I would maybe put a $5 on Gio Reyna getting his first start. Favre obviously wanted to start him in the Revier Derby of all fixtures, so he definitely thinks Reyna is good to go, and kind of starting Sancho after this whole debate now would seem like somewhat of a reactionary move. I don't know if Favre cares about this stuff, but I think there's enough of a case to be made for Reyna deserving his first start for that to make sense, and Sancho can come on during the second half. And as for you kind of circumvented the word trap game there, Stefan, which is
you don't mention that word on this podcast, because when you do,
shit happens.
When we already talk about automatisms and Matthias mentions Tom Brady and it's going about deflation later, I think kind of the entire episode is a bit off the rails, and maybe it's the beer next to me, but to me, I think the one factor that probably works in Dortmund's favor almost is that the first leg was such a shambles for them, and that they had to scramble at home on a Friday evening. I didn't watch it live because I was away, but I remember vividly following it on some sort of ticker website. And they had to scramble for a late 3-3 draw by, I think Marco Reus scored the final goal in added time. I think that works in their favor this time, because there's no way they don't talk about the first meeting with Paderborn before this game, so everybody's senses should be heightened. And as you already mentioned, the Dortmund season isn't over. They haven't sewn up qualifying for the Champions League, and obviously this is I don't think it's the final game of the match day, because Leipzig and Cologne are playing on Monday night, but they will know how Leverkusen got on, how Gladbach got on, so there's a good chance they know they need a result against Paderborn, which is a given anyway, because it's Paderborn, the last place team in the league, who haven't won at home in quite a while. So I really don't think this is the kind of game where Dortmund trip up.
First of all, I don't think this show went off the rails at all, to be honest. I think we're running a very tight ship here, and to continue in that vein, I think it is time for predictions. So, Matthias, you may go first.
I'm going to say 4-1 to Dortmund.
Lars?
4-2 to Dortmund.
All right. I also predict Dortmund scoring 4, but I don't see Paderborn scoring. So even though they have quite a good attack and are most certainly doing better right now than Schalke in the Rückrunde, because Schalke are last after losing yet another game against Düsseldorf. So there you go. So 4-0 win for me. So yeah, I guess that wraps it all up for us. And we've talked a lot about how this title race is over, but I've seen earlier that the 2 games that Hansi Flick has lost so far came against Bayer Leverkusen and Gladbach. So if history were to repeat itself there, Dortmund need to win the next 3 games, and they are 1 point behind Bayern. So that's all I'm going to say. So don't get your hopes up, but I don't think it's 100% lost yet. So just gonna put it out there before we go. But anyway, Matthias, I think this is a very good time to wrap it up finally. So please tell our listeners how to get in touch with you.
You can find me on Twitter at Matthias Suk.
Very well. Lars?
After finding Matthias, you can find me at Lars Pollmann.
Or alternatively at Yellowwallpod, as we found out recently.
Yeah. I mean, do you also get the appearance fee, or can I keep that?
No, you can keep that. So you can find me at Stefan Butzko and all of us at Yellowwallpod on Twitter and Facebook. And if you want to subscribe to the show in various means, then please do that via our YouTube channel, which is, I think, if you just type in Yellowwallpod, you will find it. And otherwise, of course, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Amazon, and all the other ways you can subscribe to a podcast. Our RSS feed is where our written content is on theyellowwall.net, where you can find it. So as always, if you want to contribute financially, please go to patreon.com/theyellowwall. And I want to thank all of our patrons for contributing. That is very nice of you guys and girls. So yeah, with that all being said, as always, thank you for listening, especially after a 1-0 loss against Bayern. And I can see that a lot of people actually don't want to hear about Dortmund afterwards. So if you did and hear this outro, thank you very much. And all I will have to say is thank you for listening. Until next week, goodbye.